Hey there, welcome to First Look. I'm at Frick Park and I'm recording this before it gets too hot. I think it's gonna get too hot, so I'll be recording it in the morning. Thanks for being here this week. So, we're moving forward in through Samuel, and now we've gotten through 1 Samuel, and now we're moving into 2 Samuel. And the book begins in a kind of epic way, and which I appreciate. And the first book does the same. Well, but before I do that, let me kind of give us a little bit of a recap of where we are. So the last couple of weeks we've been looking at the life of Samuel into the life of David and Jonathan and Saul. And what we've been kind of working through is how all of those relationships kind of affect each other. And so one of the things that we've been looking at least this past week, was the really strong relationship between Jonathan and David, and then the kind of triangulated relationship that Jonathan had with his father Saul, and Saul has with David, which is obviously complicated and all those things, given who David would be. And so this story, which again I'm going to have some kind of artificial pause moment so that you can stop and read it for yourself, is right at the beginning of 2 Samuel. So the story is 2 Samuel chapter 1. Verse 1 gives you the context, and then verses 17 through 27 are really the focus of the story. Okay, so 2 Samuel chapter 1, verse 1, and then 17 through 27. Okay. So, just to kind of give you an understanding of where we are, when we left off the last time, you had the relationship between Jonathan and David kind of beginning and blooming, and then this harsh back and forth relationship that Saul has with David. And that kind of complexity would go on for years. Saul would keep David close, one, because kind of adhering to that old adage, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. But then in addition to that, there's this, David is extraordinarily valuable to Israel as a military leader, as that kind of figure. So he's invaluable in that sense. So you have this relationship where Saul in some ways needs David, but then, hates David. And David's married to his daughter, and, is very, very much tied and connected to Jonathan. And both of those two, not only stick up for David, but also, help him escape sometimes. Because in his decline, I think more of a mental, kind of emotional decline, what we see in Saul is this person who is trying to keep it together, is trying to live out the rest of his time as king, but then also face the reality that they're never going to be, close. They're never going to be okay, and he lashes out and he rages, and at some point David had to basically escape. And at different points along the way, David could have, it's very interesting, and this is an important setup to the story. At different places, David has the opportunity to basically just eliminate the threat. So there's one story where, Saul was basically hunting David, and David gets the better of him and could have killed him, and doesn't. And then he shows Saul, hey, I could have done this, but I'm not, because I care about you. I care about Jonathan. I care about your family. I care about, being faithful to you. And Saul kind of is really thankful about that. But it doesn't really last. But it lasts long enough to keep David alive and to keep things moving until the end. So eventually, what happens is they have a war. And I think it's with the Amalekites. I think. I could be wrong. And if I'm right, then the reason that that's significant is because it's the group of people that Saul was supposed to eliminate and then didn't, who kind of come back to haunt them. I could be wrong about that, but I think I'm right. That's not as much important to the story, but anyway, in battle, both Saul and Jonathan die. And so now David, that's kind of where the story picks up. They die in battle. And then in the beginning of 2 Samuel, you have this transition that happens. So the first transition is that Samuel dies. How Samuel is still alive at this point, I don't know. Poor guy has been through so many things, but he's still with us. So Samuel dies right at the end of 2 Samuel. And then they have this funeral, I guess you could say, for Saul and Jonathan. And it's at this point that it's probably okay for you to pause, because that's the setup. Because David is now giving instructions to the nation in terms of mourning. So I'm going to do a funny pause face, and then you'll come back. So ready? Okay, pause. Okay, now you're back. So you read 2 Samuel chapter 1, verses 17 through 27. Okay. So what we see in this part of the story is David doing something that I think, this is kind of the epic part, is that he basically leads the time of mourning. And he gives unique instructions to the people about how they're going to do so. And I think that he's asking them to learn a song, and I think it's one that he writes, but he has them all learn this song so that they can be sort of the anthem of their grieving for Saul and for Jonathan. And of course, the part of it that I think we find fairly amazing is that in this story, what you have is David really pouring his heart out about how he feels about not only how it feels about Jonathan, which you would imagine is extraordinarily hard for him to recognize that this is what happened to his very close soulmate, but what happens to Saul, because he only has really wonderful things to say about Saul, and that's kind of the part that I think is pretty amazing. And because you would expect, of course, that he would have something amazing to say about Jonathan. You know, he's going to miss this person in his life that has been so close. But he doesn't leave it at that. He really lifts Saul up. He doesn't throw Saul under any kind of bridge. You know, Saul, for anything he lacked, he was also someone who, until the end, was trying to serve as king, and was trying to serve the people of Israel as well as he could. And so David honors that. And I think from that is there's two parts of that I think I'll be looking at with as much emphasis as I can. So the first one is, well, let me kind of give you the title. The title of the sermon is Recovery. And so, you know, some of that is grief. Like, so looking at the grief that we see David kind of working through in this moment, and the way he conducts everything kind of moving forward. But the other element to it is recovering from kind of all the things that had happened so that he could be the person that he needed to be. You know, like this was a way of David sort of getting right so that he could be the king that now he was meant to be and called to be, and that Israel, you know, would need in the moment. Because, you know, he had been through a lot of traumatic things, and trauma was not, this was not the last of the things in David's life that would be traumatic. But what we see, you know, when we think about it is, you know, those traumatic experiences are not isolated to David. You know, all of this transpired in front of all the people. You know, everyone knew the story. Everyone knew that Jonathan should have been the king, or would have been king, if God hadn't moved in the way that God moved. And so you have this situation where the people are having to also recover from the idea of, like, you know, we're devoting our lives and we're devoting our nation to this person. And when you devote it to this person, you're also devoting it to their family and their line. And then all of a sudden, that's gone, you know, and it's gone before it even started, really. We begged for a king, we got a king. God decided that wasn't the way that the nation needed to go. Samuel anoints this David person. David has proven himself to be worthy of that, but he's still not Saul. And he's not the line of Saul. And that feeling never really goes away. And that was the part of this that I think, like, you really kind of have to look, you got to look into the future to kind of really get the larger arc of that. But that part of, I think, my focus is that the recovery that we see David trying to do, just so he can be king, is ongoing. Like, it never really stops, right? It's not like, okay, now I'm done with that and everybody else is okay and we all move on. It's like you become equipped to handle the next thing, because all that's not going away. And what we see there is, like, what we see eventually is you have David goes to Solomon, and then Solomon becomes king, and kind of the great reign of Solomon. And then by the end of Solomon, the kingdom divides again. Not again, divides. And it divides along lines of loyalty, basically. That you have these tribes that were more loyal to Saul and to his line, and then ones that were more loyal to David. And so it doesn't go away. But for David's sake, for the moment, he has to be able to not only recover from the weight of what happened between him and Saul, and years of feeling like he was not safe and whatever, so that he can go and be the person he's meant to be. And so he kind of proves himself in that moment as someone who doesn't unify the people through like, okay, we're going to go conquer somebody else and prove our strength and prove our worth in that kind of macho kind of way. But we're going to be a country that grieves this, that learns the same song, that learns something together that's sacred. And that, I think, for me, is David leading into who he was supposed to be that made him different from Saul. So, as he honors the king and as he honors the prince, he does so in a way that kind of highlights his own unique spirit, his own unique qualities. At least that's the way that I see it. Because, of course, not only is David going to continue to be, a strong leader from a military sense, but he's also going to be a strong leader from a religious, spiritual sense, priestly sense. And he's beginning that era of his own reign in that way, by using those skill sets. So it's kind of a fascinating story, the way it's all set up, because you see this just outpouring of emotional depth from David when you read the story, and you listen to the words that he puts together. It's heartbreak in a way that I think would be unique to him, because he was going to mourn Saul specifically in a very complicated way, right? And he was going to mourn Jonathan in a very different way. And, a couple of people brought up to me this week, like, is it at all possible that this was not simply, between David and Jonathan, was not simply a platonic relationship? Meaning, was it romantic also? And my answer was, I don't know. There's passages in there. If I'm just looking at it from a 360 kind of viewpoint, one, it never says that, and two, it does say, he actually says in this passage, David says in this passage, my love for my brother, meaning Jonathan, is greater than that of the love of women. Meaning, this goes beyond something commonly romantic. It's stronger than even that, and which is really what I wanted to lean in. We can speculate wherever we want to, and it's perfectly fine. But the premise that I was really focused on was how strong the bonds of connection can be, and that they can go beyond the ways that we commonly think of them. And I think that David's connection with Jonathan is just this kind of amazing way of thinking about what relationships can look like. They don't have to look any particular way in order to be super meaningful and extraordinarily profound in our lives. And they don't have to make sense to anybody else. I mean, that's the thing. We can speculate on that, and I'm sure people speculated on that. But at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. What matters is what it meant to the two of them, what it meant for their lives, and how powerful it can remind us of what love can be, what care for each other can look like. And that for them, it went beyond power structures. They cared about each other beyond what may have been good for them politically or economically or from a legacy standpoint. Jonathan cared about David in a way that exemplified the kind of sacrificial, all-encompassing, deeper than circumstances kind of love that we would hope for how we treat each other in general, right? And that's, I think, what I wanted to kind of look at in this particular sermon was David has love for these people, these two men, in a very different way, for a very different reason. And yet I think that when he is talking about it in this passage, his heart is thoroughly broken for both of them. Regardless of how complicated or messy things are, I think he also is able to see past the black and white of, well, Saul was like this and Jonathan was like this. That he was able to see something that went deeper, and that's something that I think is important. And here's what I mean. We often look at each other through the lens of what you do to me and how that affects me directly. That when I see you, I see someone who treats me this way, or talks about me this way, or it says mean or good things to me in this way or that way. I have people like that in my life that treat me a certain way. Some people that treat me wonderfully and some people who don't. And what I try to remember, especially for the people who don't, is why that's true. And so why it's true falls into two categories. Either A, something that I need to rectify, something that I need to work on, apologize for, be willing to be humble about. I have to do some self-reflecting. I have to know myself. But the other side of it is often people treat you like that because of something else. That they're suffering through something that they can't really do anything about, or they don't know what to do about. And so you kind of become either a representation of that or your collateral damage. And most people are doing things out of, fear or sadness. Like we talk about bullies. Bullies do things because the bullying action makes them feel big and strong, Well, they want to feel that way because someone else has probably made them feel weak and not important. And so they lash out in those ways. Or someone hasn't taught them what compassion and empathy look like. So they're working with a lack of understanding about how they should treat other people. And that's part of it. And I think David had a very keen understanding of, Saul didn't always do the right thing, but there are some really damaging reasons why he acted the way he did, why he was so fearful, why he was so angry, why he was so damaged. How could you knowingly go through life understanding that you somehow failed so badly as the first king that before you were even dead, they had a plan to replace you and go in another direction? And that the one who anointed you king told you how utterly displeased God was with you. It's like, how could you not, experience that? And it kind of reminds you a little bit of like Noah. The part of Noah that we skip over is, again, the ark, finally ends up on dry land. And the first thing Noah does is build a vineyard and just nearly drink himself to death. And, his kids find him, and he's, it's clearly this like traumatic response to something. And, and so it's like, yeah, as awful as maybe that kind of makes you feel, it's like, yep, no, at least it's coming from a place you can get your mind around. And it's the same, I think, is true for Saul. And I think David recognizes that and kind of tries to honor that. So those are the kinds of things I want to talk about, because I think they're really relevant to your life, to my life. What does it mean to wrestle with grief and trauma? What does it mean to try to recover from that and claim some kind of goodness in your own life? Knowing that you can't always eliminate something that's always going to be a part of you, but that it can be the part that fuels you to, make good decisions and healthy ones moving forward. So anyway, that's where I'm at. That's what I'm thinking about. I'm going to leave you here. So thanks for taking a walk with me. Thanks for being you. And I'll see you next time for another First Look. Okay.